What fish could resist such a tasty morsel, I ask? None. They all love this thing. This is a little variation on the Bob Clouser Floating Minnow. Bob Clouser patterns have special places in my box. The Clouser Minnow, come on. The Clouser crayfish are smallmouth blasters, as is this one, which isn't quite as well known, it seems, as some of his other staple patterns. So what Bob did here was he took prefab foam spider bodies, or in my case, I've scaled it down just a little and I'm using beetle bodies, and he made a floating head out of that. So this thing is super fun to fish, not too hard to tie, and just a blast of a pattern. So let's whip some up. The hook I have in the vise here is a size 8 hopper hook. And thread here, I don't think it matters too much. It's pretty much all going to be hidden. I actually just like to use thread that I don't use for anything else. I'm using this odd kind of blue color. You know, an impulse buy thread that I don't use. So I usually use the stuff that I don't really use for anything else. So the first material we're going to tie in here is some crystal flash, because, you know, everything's better with some crystal flash. So I'm going to tie in about 6 strands here. And you notice I'm keeping everything up towards the front. We're going to tie everything up towards the front on this pattern. So I'm using a chartreuse crystal flash. And we're going to trim that off about a hook shank to a hook shank and a half long. So we have plenty coming off the rear of the fly. And the next thing we're going to tie in is some rubber legs. I'm using a black with red flake. And we're using about 3 strands of that. Do 3 or 4. Go crazy if you want. That's totally up to you. Rubber legs just work and move great on top of the water. Now I'm going to trim these a little bit longer than our crystal flash. And our final material is going to be a little hank of marabou. Get us a little bit of body and also that great movement that you get out of marabou. So I went ahead and pre-cut that to be about the same length as the other tail materials that I have going on there. And that's all the materials that we're tying in. We'll get that all lashed in real good, whip finish, and then we'll move on to the head of the fly. Let's move on to our little bug bodies here. So this part can be a little fiddly. The way that I like to do it is just get one side roughly set. So I'm going to come over on the far side here and just do one little drop of super glue. And then I'm going to eyeball getting this little body where I want it. Right there looks good, so I'm going at a little bit of an upper angle. And we're going to get that set. You can come in with your bodkin and just sort of work that glue around a little bit. There we go. So once you get that one side set, it makes it a little bit easier because now we can just try to match that. So now that we're ready to move on to that other side, I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to apply a little more glue. This is one of those things, less is more. Too much glue, I think, actually makes this more difficult because it takes it longer for that glue to actually set up. So get a decent drop of glue in there, but don't go too crazy. And I'm going to actually take some of that out using my bodkin. I just want everything to have a nice little sheen of glue, but I don't want it to be super saturated. Now we're just going to come in with our other little body here, and we're going to try to match that up and pinch those together. And I am going to try to get them to where those seams match up and close. So you got to just kind of hold that there for a second. And it is much easier if you don't use a ton of glue because it will set up quicker for you with less glue. Now this will catch fish, but you know, we got to appeal to fishermen. So we'll put some eyes on here. I do not think the eyes are a necessity to coax a fish into eating this. So just so you know, but you know, we'll get some eyes on there. So I'm just going to get a little dab of super glue. just like so. There we go. I got my eyes set. You can bypass these eyes. We've done it before. This will fish just fine without the eyes, but you know, we just like it to look as nice as we can get it to look. Traditionally, the Clouser pattern uses bucktail or supreme or super hair, things like that. I like these materials. This thing fishes fantastic using these three materials coming off the tail. And I find that these are a little easier to work with. Things don't get as bulky, which makes gluing these together easier. So the hook's so far below everything, this thing keels in the water and runs beautifully. And it's just one of those with this hook placement. I mean, even if you're getting bumps on this, you tend to get hookups. It's a very nice design. It's going to fish like a popper, but it's much more subdued. So it's not going to push nearly as much water. And sometimes I think that laid back approach really helps to get some fish interest. It's just not too much for them to turn fish off. So it's a great subtle pattern. It gets a little lower in the water column because of the way this hook is. So it sets fairly deep. So it's putting plenty under there for the fish to see, but you're still staying on top. This thing works great for largies, smallies, panfish. We've caught all kinds of different critters off this. We've had a lot of, actually haven't caught many, but we have caught a few trout off small versions of this, and it's one of those that'll just turn their heads. So we fished it some at night for trout and had some success. So it's just a very versatile pattern. Little fiddly, but once you do a couple, they're actually very easy to tie. I'll put a link in the description of our little bodies here if you want to pick some up. So tie some up. This thing is so fun to fish. Tight lines.